Good morning, Year 10. So I just wanted to make a little video for this week's lesson. First off, as you can see from the screen, a little recap of what I got you to look at last week, which was about changes that have happened in rural areas. You'll have seen that there, by and large, there are sort of two main sort of things that are going on, and in a way they're opposites to each other. The first one, hopefully, you found out about was counter-urbanisation. And this is the movement of people from cities to the countryside. And there's a number of reasons why that happens. Well, I think maybe my photographs give you some possibilities, and that's that the quality of life in rural areas can be very nice for people, especially if you like that type of thing. You value sort of a nice clean environment, peace and quiet, community, things like that. There's increasingly people wanting to move away from cities. Maybe they're worried about crime, things like that, pollution. So that's one, that's counter-urbanisation. The second one, which is, it's not really an opposite to it, but it sort of feels that way when you talk about them, is rural depopulation. So this is where the number of people living in rural areas is declining, it's going down. Now you might think, well, how can those two things happen at once? So it's not possible to have the population, more people moving to the countryside and people moving away. Well, of course it is, because the countryside isn't one ubiquitous place. It's lots of different places. So in some places in the countryside, they've seen an increase in population. Now those tend to be places that are either close enough to big urban areas that you can live there but still commute to the city quite easily. And you find those sorts of, so they're nice villages, they look really rural, but actually maybe you can get on a train and be in London in an hour, or in Manchester in an hour, or wherever, or it's close to a motorway, you can drive easily. So those places have seen their house prices go up because more people want to live there, so it costs more to live there because more competition, and lots of people live there. Another example of places that have seen an increase are places that are extremely sort of beautiful, so especially places in like national parks. There, sometimes the people buying the houses, they're buying what are called second homes. In other words, places they go to for their holidays. They go and stay there maybe at weekends or in the summer and things like that. So they're two examples of how you've got places that have seen this increase. And that can cause problems for local people because it means the houses get more expensive. And maybe if you're traditionally from a rural location and you work in the rural economy, you probably don't earn as much money as the people who are now competing for those houses who have jobs in the city. I suppose another thing worth mentioning is people working from home using the internet. That makes moving to the countryside more possible as well. On the other hand, you've got some places in the countryside that are sort of so far away from big places or quite isolated that actually people don't want to move to those places so much because it just wouldn't work. Life would be too difficult. Their drive to work would be unrealistically long. They'd feel too cut off from shops and services and their friends. It'd be too hard to get to places. It would all just take too long. So those places have seen the opposite. They've seen a decline in numbers as the people who originally lived there sort of maybe move away for work and things like that. So that's rural depopulation. So the two are like opposites. The direction of travel is definitely opposite of where people are moving from and to, but we're not talking about the same place. Much we're talking about the rural UK, the countryside. That is very different between places. Okay, moving on to what I want you to look at this week. The first thing is about the north-south divide, and this is on pages 292 to 293. Read those pages carefully. There's some maps and things to look at. There's quite a lot of information. And we've got some questions there that I'd like to answer. So if you want to pause the video in a minute and do that before you move on, you can. If you'd rather just watch the whole thing and then go back and do this, that's fine too. But you need to explain what the north-south divide is, what is it, why it exists, what are the reasons for it, and give some examples of things that are different. As a real overview, just to give you a rough idea, so this is about in the UK, the sort of the north of our country compared to the south. There is a difference in sort of levels of wealth and quality of life. So things like how much sort of money people have, how well paid jobs are, even actually things like life expectancy tend to be better in the south than in the north, which might seem quite strange. We're quite a small country. Why would you have this sort of difference? Well, that's for you to find out and have a look, but that's sort of a real background overview of what we're talking about. And there is, in this country, there is a difference between the north and south. And one of the things that government try and do, and actually the current government, when they won the recent election, one of the things they've sort of said they're going to do is try and balance up this north-south divide. Whether they manage it or not is another thing. People have been saying that for a long time, but it's something that exists and is recognised. So what we're going to look at is high-speed rail, or HS2, which hopefully you've heard of by looking in the news. Now this is linked to the north-south divide because what it will be is a new railway line that links the north and south. And one of the ways a lot of people believe that you could try and balance up the north-south divide is through better connections. I would quickly mention at this point that that's not universally agreed. Some people think actually that doesn't balance things up, but maybe that's a discussion for another time. This is one way that a lot of people think, well, if you make it easier to travel between the two, then that will help sort of even things up. So, the information in the textbook is over the page. It's on pages 294 and 295. So we've put there, right, 3 points to summarise what HS2 is and why it's proposed to be built. I suppose the name gives away a bit. You know, it's rail and it's high speed. If you're wondering why it's called High Speed 2, that's because we've already got High Speed 1. It's quite small. That's the bit of rail from London to the Channel Tunnel. That's the original high speed rail in this country. But High Speed 2 is a much bigger plan, and you can see from the map there, you know, the full plan would be very big. As with all big projects, there are arguments for and against it. So, you know, it will cost a lot of money, for example. It will have some impacts on the environment that are bad, although you could argue it might have some other impacts that are good. High-speed rail is very common in other countries. So you might have heard of, like, Japan has the bullet train, high-speed rail on the continent. So countries like France, Germany, Spain, all have fairly extensive high-speed rail networks. Our country doesn't. I suppose if you just look on a map and you see the size of our country compared to the land mass of some of those places, our country's a fair bit smaller, and some people would argue, well, we don't really need high speed rail because we're quite small and normal speed is fine. But I'll leave you to have a proper look at that. So 3 points just to summarise what is high speed HS2 and sort of what are the reasons for it. That then leads us on to the arguments for and against. And again, the same pages, you see sort of lots of information about that. So what I want you to do is have a read of that and summarise the main arguments. So this is different from the previous thing. The previous thing is just saying what it is and why you might build it. Now we're looking at, well, what are the people who are for it, what would they argue? And the people against it, what do they argue? It says there you might want to do it in speech bubbles to show, you know, so you could have speech bubbles coming from one side of the page for the other side against. You don't have to do that, but sometimes that's useful as a visual thing. It's an extension there. Consider who is affected by each point raised. With arguments for and against, it's quite rare in geography that, you know, it affects everyone the same way. And often you'll find there are a group of people who will be really against it strongly, and then another group who might be for it. Just one example, you know, if the proposed new railway route goes straight through your garden, you're probably going to be against it fairly strongly. Whereas someone who currently lives in the north and regularly gets the train down to London, they might be all for it because it'll improve their journey. Okay, so that's the next thing, to have those different arguments. Final thing I'd like you to do, obviously this video is posted on Edmodo. I'd like you to comment on Edmodo. So comment on Edmodo and say whether overall you think High Speed 2 is a good idea for our country or not, and just give the main reason for your decision. You don't need to write an essay of all the for and against, but normally, even when you've got a big list of for and against, when you come to a decision, there's a main reason that you think, well, you know, that that's the main reason why I think we should do it. Okay, so that's this week's work. Hope that all makes sense. I'll see some of you on Friday to go over some of the other stuff. But if not, if you're not in that group, hope you'll stay safe. Best of luck with the work, and I'll speak to you soon.